this first athlete leading us off in the finals, the final 3 rounds today. Rather bulky, strong young diver. Performing a reverse 1.5 somersault in the tuck position will be Kyle Kibbe, representing Southport High School. He and his teammate were both in the competition today.
33.6 the total.
This is a rather solid entry for reverse 1.5 tuck. Kyle tends to move his head early on the start. He creates rotation by moving his head instead of swinging the arms, and that is not necessarily something the judges are looking for. That could be a reason for some of the deductions there. Casey is an amazing athlete at the state level. He really knows how to turn the light switch on when he needs to. Going into this dive, and including this dive, we've seen Casey hit 22 dives at the state meet in a row before he started the contest today. He's 9 dives into the event, and he has not missed a single dive.
It's a good score, 54.
7.5 is an excellent score for a final round dive. The inward 1.5 pike is considered an optional. It doesn't have a tremendous amount of degree of difficulty, but Casey is certainly not lacking degree of difficulty coming into the next 2 rounds. He's got some very impressive reverse twisters.
For those of you that might have stepped away from your television briefly, from Butler basketball, they did beat Cleveland State 58-56 at Hinkle.
A very solid, beautiful, good toe point, good form, front full twisting 1.5, performed by Danton Rogers from Bloomington South. We've got a program down there that's been underway for about 3 years at the club level by our Olympic gold medalist and Indiana representative Mark Lenzi, who's coaching down there, and we're starting to see some of his athletes do very well.
Not really going to update the leaderboard much, Sean, through the first couple of dives. Really no point in that because it's going to be ever evolving and ever changing. Once we get to that 3rd dive, that's when we can really kind of sit up and start taking notice.
Essentially, that is correct. Everybody's going to have an optional going into their last dive, but in these first 2 rounds of the finals, an athlete might be throwing a simple dive first and a complex dive second, and the next athlete might be doing the opposite. So it's hard to compare scores. We just saw a reverse 2 somersaults in a tuck position performed by Max Scripture. Foot first entries are generally not preferred over the head first entry, but it's got a fair amount of degree of difficulty, and he did put the dive in vertical.
Hank Dussard of Bedford North Lawrence with the next dive.
Hank is performing a reverse dive pike. This one had pulled, meaning he moved his head and shoulders on the come out instead of pressing his hips up toward the ceiling, so it washed by a little bit beyond vertical.
Judges are all officials, is that correct? IHSAA officials?
This is the first year that IHSAA has gone the route of putting all officials on the panel. And the obvious intent there is to try to avoid bias that might be in place by diving coaches sitting in that position. So the next task, and that they've been really proactive in trying to meet, is the training elements for those swimming officials so that their judging skills are up to par with the quality of the dives performed.
Because certainly officials in other sports have never been called biased.
Our sport is apparently entirely
bias-free.
Subjective.
How's that? Ben Rankin from Warsaw totals 27 points on the dive. The degree of difficulty was 1.5.
An inward dive pike, a little bit of arch. His arms had moved off his lateral plane, meaning they were behind his body line instead of in line with his body, which could cause an entry to be a little bit other than vertical.
Chris Simmons from Oak Hill up next. Degree of difficulty 2.1 on the dive.
A basic skill, a compulsory skill, as you may say, and somebody's offering us a little bit of a handshake in front of our video camera here. Hopefully they might not realize we're live, or they do realize we're live. Chris did a nice job with this dive. He ducked his chin as the twist initiated, which caused his feet to move forward as an equal opposite reaction, and put the dive in slightly short of vertical on entry.
Mitchell Gagger from Kokomo. Degree of difficulty 1.5.
Again, a compulsory dive. We're not going to see a lot of somersaulting. This is a basic skill. Everybody's got one basic skill to perform in the last 3. This is a back dive tuck, and Mitchell's been steady Eddie all day long. He hasn't missed a single dive, and he's upped his performance from the regional meet.
Tyler Klingerman up next from Plainfield High School.
This is going to be a huge round for Tyler, doing a reverse 2.5. It's got a lot of degree of difficulty. He's a big jumper.
3 the degree of difficulty, in fact, and a nice round of applause from those seated here rooting him on. Hopefully the judges will feel equally as impressed and pleased.
He made it around with a lot of height and a lot of safe distance here. A little bit heavy on the entry. These scores are going to be very good. You multiply the middle 3 scores essentially by 3 for that dive. He's going to get a lot of money on that.
Totaled 60 there. Gives him a total of 381.45. Tyler Klingerman from Plainfield High School.
It'll be great to compare that judge's score to some of the other degree difficulty skills that we're going to see later on in this round and next round. It's a very successful reverse 1.5 somersault with 1.5 twist. Well performed, great jump. The athlete was able to show the dive right out in front of the board. And Ross, being one of 2 identical twins here in the finals, it's rather amazing. Both these boys are able to push each other to this level of performance.
From Avon High School, racked up 53.3. Anthony Trinoski from Valparaiso.
A back dive in the layout position. This is a vintage diving position, classic 1970s position. And Valparaiso is not uncommon to see a lot of back dives and reverse dives straight out of the Valparaiso program. Coach Bill Chappell has had probably, and my statistics could be off, but probably more male and female qualifiers in this sport, in this state, than any other coach who's active today.
Darian Schmidt is up next.
Darian, a very pretty and powerful back dive in the pike position. He didn't overrule the smoothness of the dive with his power, but he did show a strong jump, put the dive way up in the air.
Total 34.4, giving him a total of 361.45.
Darian also diving out of the Bloomington area, I believe with the club coach, Mark Lindsay.
.2 the degree of difficulty on the dive for the other young man from Avon.
A fundamentally sound dive by Thomas, a reverse 1.5 with half twist, a little bit distant, but good mechanics, straight up and down finish, and this is scoring pretty well.
42.9 the total, giving him an overall score of 326.10.
It's got to be interesting, identical twins. We see them occasionally in this sport. They make great synchro partners for the sport of diving, where 2 dives are performed in tandem with each other on separate boards.
Kevin Mosier up next from New Prairie.
This is a reverse dive in a layout position, also a classic historically vintage position. We see a lot of pike dives as opposed to the straight position. The pike dives and the tuck dives offer adjustment opportunities in the air, where if the dive isn't just right, they could make adjustments and line it up.
Next up, Derek Pennington from Whiteland High School, 258.85 coming in.
Front full twisting 1.5 somersault. Derek did a nice job with the jump and the twist. He didn't quite post his arms out to the right and left in a symmetrical pattern. He had a little bit of a hip turn on the entry and a little loose with his legs. Looking at his expression coming out of the water, he's real happy with where that ended up.
40.7 the point total.
You learn from a diver's lack of poker face on a skill like that, which skill they may have been having trouble with throughout the season. If they hit better than their average score, you could read it on their face.
Ingram Cade is up next from Carmel High School.
Ingram, a tall and skinny figure. You see all sorts of different body types represented in our sport, and some strengths and weaknesses associated with each body type. On a voluntary dive, somebody who's tall and slender, they produce a great body line going into the water.
Boy, 7s and 8s, a low of 6.5, 1.7 on the degree of difficulty. He still managed to squeeze 35.7 out of that.
Ingram's been doing a great job today. A hair twist on the entry, meaning that the judges could see a small portion of both legs instead of just a silhouette of the side view of the body.